We're going to start chapter 5 with a few specific terms instead of big ideas, a couple terms that we'll be using in the chapter to go over a few of the things, a few of the bigger ideas. So supply, that's the obvious first place to start. Because supply, now we're changing directions. The good news about chapter 5 is that you've covered a lot of chapter 5 already, because chapter 5 is mostly just a mirror of chapter 4, at least as far as supply goes. Supply, by definition, is the amount of goods offered for sale at any particular time. Your book says amount of a product that would be offered for sale at all possible prices that could prevail in the market. So no longer are we talking about buyers demanding a product. Now we're talking about sellers offering a product. So let's get used to the fact that now we're going to be talking about things at a different angle, but much of what we talk about, especially in section 1 of chapter 5, is going to be easier because we've already covered it in chapter 4 with demand. The terms input and output, we'll use those ones several times in this chapter. Input, different things that you put into a business, and often those include the factors of production that we've talked about. The inputs, like labor, is an input into a business. The capital that you have, those are inputs. And when you add all your inputs together and you create something, you create output. Output are the products that you come up with. So input, the factors of production that go into a business, and then output, the things that are produced in that business. So we'll use those terms back and forth several times. Short run, long run, easier terms, and it makes you sound really smart when you start using terms like this. So short run and long run, you're talking about making changes for your company either in the short run or in the long run. So a short run change for a company normally means that you're changing the amount of labor that you are using in your company. Because normally the only factor of production you can change quickly is labor. Like, let's say somebody puts in an order to my business and I have to increase production or output by 10%. Well, I can't all of a sudden go buy a machine and install that machine and train people to use that in a day or two. That would take weeks, maybe even a month to get that all ready to go. Getting raw materials or the resources, that sometimes takes time. Entrepreneurship being one of the factors. It doesn't make any sense to just add entrepreneurship after I've already started my company. So the only factor that can be changed quickly is labor. I can typically go hire more people, or have the people that work for me right now, they can work overtime. And so a short run change is a change that can be made in a company quickly. It's a factor of production that can be changed fast. So if I need a short run change, I need some more output now, I typically can change my labor. Long run would be the other ones. In the long run, I'll be able to buy that extra capital, install it, train it, and all this kind of stuff and get it ready. I can expand my factories. I can expand to a second location. I can hire a business partner to be another entrepreneur. I can do all that kind of stuff in the long run, but typically, short run, we're only talking about changes in labor. Now, not always, but typically, short run is just about labor. Variable, you recognize that from your math terms. And variable just means it has the ability to be changed. We'll talk about variable a couple of different times in this chapter. We've already talked about fixed income so far this semester. So now we've got variable things, variable costs, variable inputs, things like that. So just remember, variable in economics means the same thing as it does in math, the ability to be changed. And the last one on this page we have are raw materials. Raw materials, just those unprocessed goods. As far as factors of production go, this is what you start with in the factors of production. You start with the oil or corn as an unprocessed natural resource, and you turn it into a factory and you create some kind of a product with that one. But you start with those raw materials. So that'll be a term that we use in this chapter as well. Said the definition of supply, your book says, the amount of a product that will be offered for sale at all possible prices that can prevail in the market. So we don't have to worry about the whole desirability, willingness. Supply is just an amount. It's an amount of goods that either your company or all companies put on the market for sale at all prices during whatever period of time we're talking about. Now, we have the law of demand, and the law of demand, you remember, was that if the price of a product increases, that demand would decrease, and if the price of a product decreased, then demand would increase. That was an inverse relationship of price and demand. But you're going to notice that, as with this diagram right here, that supply and price are proportional. They go up together or down together, and I'll show you why in a second. I'll illustrate it. But for the most part, ceteris paribus, if price of a product increases, if the overall price of a product increases, then supply will increase along with it. Now, that doesn't always mean that you increase the price in the store and therefore you supply more. It could mean that, but it could also mean things like gasoline. When the price of gas goes up and a gas station is able to make more profit selling that gas, they might be willing to supply more of that gas because the profits are higher, and a profit motive makes you think, okay, I can make more money now selling gas. I'll go ahead and shift over to sell and try to sell more of the gas. Maybe we'll advertise that more, whatever you need to do. If the price of a product falls, you'll supply less of that product because now you're not going to make as much. And we'll illustrate that with the same kind of law of demand, or demand curve that we had, or supply curve that we did with demand. One quick note before we go into the demand curves and such is one term your book doesn't really talk about, but every semester when you guys build your businesses and you're sitting in front of the sharks always ask questions about what you call supply chain. Because for every business to be able to come up with output, you kind of have to go through a process. It's not just you go buy some stuff, you make it, and you send it out. It's not as simple as that. So for instance, this is a very simplified supply chain right here, but you start off with your raw materials, and in an actual business, you would discuss what company you're going to buy them from. You're going to discuss what company you're going to use to ship those raw materials to your supplier, who's going to break them down into perhaps smaller boxes or smaller containers, and then your supplier, how you're going to get those supplies into your manufacturer, and then once those things are manufactured, how are you going to work with shipping, what company are you going to use for shipping, and then they finally get to you, and then you get them to your customer. So there's everything here, from all the way from raw materials all the way to the time it gets into your customer's hands. So just be familiar right now with the term supply chain. Later on this semester, you're going to build a supply chain. If you like logistics, if you like putting things together, if you like puzzles, supply chains will be something that you'll be interested in. Even if you don't like economics, supply chains are kind of cool to put together if you like to be the person who's in charge of getting things to places, if you like to be the person who's in charge of doing the puzzles and stuff. All right, let's take a look at the supply graph. In the supply graph, the first thing that you might notice is that you have similarities. Price is still on the Y, quantity is still on the X. Of course, now we're quantity supplied, or QS, you can put, and that's fine. And you still have the same setup here. You have increments that are exactly equal here, each one by 10. Here the increments are exactly equal as well. So you've got all those same things. You got your starting spot is here. Okay, so the same setups, but now because of the law of supply, you'll notice that the line is not going in this direction like demand did, but now we're taking the bottom left to the top right. Now your supply line is going opposite. And the reason for that is the law of supply. So if you, let's say if you charge $10 for your product, okay, but your costs are $15. Well, if your costs are $15 and you're only charging $10, you're going to lose $5 per product. You're not going to offer very many for sale, or maybe none for sale. You're not going to make much money. If the cost goes up to $20, well, now you're making a little bit of money. Now your profit is going to be $5. And you might be thinking, okay, if it costs me $15 to make one of these products and I sell it for $20, maybe I can make some profit out of it. But if you go to 30, now you're thinking, aha, at $30, I can make a lot of profit. You're going to supply more. At $40, you're thinking, I can make good profit. And at $50, you're thinking, I'm banking. I'm making a lot. I'm making $35 per product. Now, you might not be able to sell every product that you make, but for each one you sell, you're making, at $50, you're making $35 profit. Now, that's, of course, we haven't taken out taxes yet, but just as far as production costs, you're making $35 per profit. And you might be thinking, if I sell 2 products at $50, it's better than if I sell 4 products at $30. Right? So the higher the price goes, the higher the quantity supplied goes, because you're able to make more and more money. You might recall under the law of demand, we said that price is an obstacle, that the higher the price is, the harder it is to have people have the ability and the willingness to spend money on that product. Well, price is not an obstacle to a business. To a business, the higher the price, the better it is for you. The higher the profits are going to go. So, supply lines are going to take this different angle. Now, this is always, as always, this is ceteris paribus. If everything remains the same, if everything remains equal, the higher the price goes, the higher the quantity goes. Now, your brain, your logical side of your brain might be thinking this doesn't make any sense, because as prices are going higher, we know that demand is going lower. So your demand is going down while your supply is going up. That doesn't sound like it's going to work out. But we're going to tackle that problem in Chapter 6. Chapter 6 will kind of go into there about how the market settles on different prices. We will try out different graphs in class. We will practice different ones. But just to make a quick note, as is usual, you label everything on your graph. We label that supply. If it's market supply, if it's supply for more than one person or one business, if it's market supply, then it is just like DD for market demand, SS for market supply. Now, since we've already gone over a change in demand, then doing a change in quantity supplied should be fairly simple. I'm sorry, that's change in quantity supplied was what we just did. That's awesome. Your teacher just messed up. This is change in supply, when the entire curve shifts. We just did the change in quantity supplied, right? So the change in supply, when the entire curve is shifting, same idea as demand. It's going to have different determinants we'll look at in just a second. But with the change of supply, when the entire supply curve is moving to the right or to the left. Now with supply, there's a few mistakes made with supply, because every once in a while when you draw your supply lines, the graph kind of creates an illusion that things are higher or lower when they aren't. For instance, if I drew a third supply line over here and called this S3, somebody might look at that and say, okay, this line is higher than this line is. S3 is higher than S1, so S3 must be an increase. Well, when you draw your lines on the supply graph, sometimes they look like this. But remember, we're not measuring up and down, right? We're measuring quantity. We're measuring back and forth. So if that line, no matter if it's kind of drawn perfect or not, your S3, this is a decrease in supply, because we're measuring quantity of supply. We're not measuring price up and down. So don't worry about the up and down. Okay, we're not measuring up and down. We're measuring back and forth. So no matter where those lines are, just make sure that you visualize them correctly and you get your graphs right. Real quick, let's run over the determinants of supply. So those determinants, let's go over first one, cost of inputs. If the inputs for a company go up in price and it costs them more to make their product, they can probably make less of their product. So in that case, the supply curve would shift to the left. Of course, if the cost of inputs goes down, then they could supply more. They'd be able to supply more, and the supply curve would shift to the right. Second one is productivity. If you can increase productivity, then you can increase your output. You can increase your supply. If your productivity decreases, then your supply curve would shift over to the left. Number 3, sorry, I'm using a brand new stylus. It's kind of sort of working. Third one is technology. If technology changes, if new technologies come along and you're able to produce more efficiently or produce faster or lower the cost of producing or something like that, if technology helps you, you can shift that curve to the right. If technology does not work, if technology makes things harder or if technology breaks down, your supply curve will shift to the left. Fourth one, taxes and subsidies. So I guess we could just call this government. But taxes and subsidies, government interference, where if the government increases taxes on businesses, you can afford to make fewer products. If the government lowers taxes, and like we hope they will in the next couple of years on businesses, then you can afford to make more products. If you can afford to make more products, hopefully you're going to hire more people to do that. Subsidies have the same effect. If the government gives a business subsidies, they can increase production or supply. If a government takes away subsidies, like we think might happen in the next couple of years, then it could reduce supplies. So that would have an impact on supply as well. The last couple that you have, the same one that we had for for demand, was expectations. When we expect things are going to get better. So right now, and we've been watching this happen for the last month or so, right now, businesses are assuming that because of this election that just took place, they're assuming that lower taxes are coming and therefore more production. So they're already starting to increase supplies and build up inventories, like we had a term earlier this year. They're starting to build up their inventories, anticipating more demand. Hopefully, all that comes true. Of course, if expectations don't come true and we expect that things are going to slow down or expect that the president isn't going to get Congress to lower taxes like he promised, then businesses may restrict supplies, and that will have an impact on it. Sixth one is government regulations. The more regulations that are passed that businesses have to abide by, it could slow production. If your parents own a business, ask them about government regulations. It's possible they have to deal with those, and it could hinder production. If the government removes those, it can go faster. If the government puts more regulations on, it could make things go slower. The seventh one of these is the number of sellers, and this is kind of mainly dealing with competition. If you're the only seller of a certain product within, let's say, a 5-mile radius, then anybody who wants that product, you're going to have probably first shot at it. They're going to come to you first. If somebody else opens up a store close by to you and the number of sellers is higher, then your supply may decrease because now some people are going to go buy from your competitor. If, however, that competitor's, they move away instead of coming in, now there's fewer sellers, now you would probably supply more, anticipating that people are going to come to you more often to get that product. So just like the determinants of demand, these are the main things that will cause the entire supply curve to move to the right or to the left. Now, some pretty good news is that as far as elasticity goes, wrapping up section 1, as far as elasticity goes, things are very, very much the same. The formulas are the same. When we did the percent change equals the difference between two numbers divided by the original number. Okay, and then we had elasticity equals the percent change in quantity, in this case supplied, divided by the percent change in price. So divide those two things is going to come up with elasticity. Okay, so that's all the same. Everything there is the same. Nothing has changed as far as those formulas go. And you figure it out the same way, and we did the math in chapter 4, and hopefully you remember most of that. However, there is one thing that changes with the elasticity of supply. And the thing with elasticity is that elasticity measures the impact that price has on demand, or in this chapter, the impact that price has on supply. So if the price of a product goes up, you know that supply is going to go up. But when supply goes up, you can't all of a sudden snap your fingers and create supply. You can do that for demand. For instance, if I'm making a podcast and it's 12:30 at night and I'm getting tired and TV's on and I see a commercial for Jack in the Box curly fries. They are some of the greatest fast food fries available. So I see that commercial, I can immediately have demand. I've got ability and willingness, and as soon as I see the commercial, now I've got desire. So as far as demand goes, demand can be immediate. As soon as I have ability and willingness, and then I gain my desire, then demand can happen right away. But supply can't. So let's say I go to Jack in the Box 12:30 in the morning, and I'm hungry, I'm a little bit tired, I got to finish this podcast, and so I drive up there and I order some curly fries, and they say, sorry, we ran out. Well, I'm a little bit ticked off, right? Because they didn't have enough supply. And they can't just snap their fingers or run a commercial and all of a sudden have more fries. Supply takes time, right? Changing your inputs and increasing output, that takes time. So one thing to remember when we're going over this fancy sounding term, theory of production, is that the theory revolves around the idea of time. Because demand is immediate, supply takes time. And since supply takes time, if all of a sudden you find out that there's a great desire to have your product, you can't change all of these things immediately. Of course, you are an entrepreneur if you started your own business, but you can't all of a sudden come up with more capital. You can change labor fairly quickly, but you still need to go find these people, and the land and the products and the resources, those things you can't change immediately. So when it comes to elasticity of supply, it's different because you can't change elasticity of supply as quickly. It's hard. So when you measure, elasticity is a measurement of how price changes supply, but when the price changes, the supply can't go up and sometimes cannot even go down really quickly. So the theory of production deals with time. So here's your definition of theory of production right here. Relationship between factors of production, the inputs, and the output of goods and services. Examines how output changes when inputs change. Now, we're not going to go real deep into this, but I do want to introduce the topic. And your book does a pretty good job when you read through on page 122. It starts going over theory of production, right? It's how inputs change output. So if I change my land, then I'm going to need more labor eventually. When I buy more land up and more resources, I'm going to have more capital and hire more labor. And anyway, it deals with all these things, how they deal with one another. If I want to increase output, then what am I going to do with my inputs? How am I going to increase these things in order to create more output? That's the idea behind theory of production. We'll talk more about it in class and bring your questions if you're unsure. Now, in order to visualize this theory of production, they've come up with an idea called the law of variable proportions. Law of variable proportions. So let's take a look at this idea. That's an A. Law of variable proportions. This is yet another really cool sounding, intelligent word. Makes you sound rather economically elite, but has a pretty basic idea. And we're going to cover the basic parts, and when you get to your college economics classes, they can expand it. But the law of variable proportion says in the short run, there's your short run term, in the short run, meaning mainly labor, output will change as one input is varied. Output will change as one input is varied. Now later on when you get to college, they'll add things to that one. But all that one says is, let's say I've got a factory that makes Hill Country Fair fruit punch soda. I'm drinking one, so it's on my mind, right? So I've got a factory that does that one. So I employ 100 laborers, right? Short runs, we're talking mainly labor. And let's say those laborers produce 1,700 cans per day. 100 laborers, 1,700 cans. But Hill Country Fair is a good price. We're kind of a slow growth economy, so maybe people are like, man, this Hill Country Fair stuff tastes good, so they jump on board. So now all of a sudden I need more, right? So let's say now I need to create more supply. So I hire 150 people. I add 50 to there, and because of that, I'm now able to produce 2,400. So this is my new output. So anyways, all the law of variable proportions is saying is that as I change one input, my output will have a result. Now, it's not always good, but the output will change as one input is varied. Now, it sounds very simple. I hope that sounds very simple to you, and it is basically a very simple idea. So let's take a look at how you visualize that. That is visualized with what you call a production function. This production function is going to visualize that same topic we just looked at. The production function is going to have a couple of specific rules for it, just like we have rules for demand curves and margin utility curves and so on. For the production function, here's how it's set up. First of all, output is going to be on the Y, and the input, or in this case it's labor, which mainly it is because it's a short run idea. So labor will be on the X. So what labor is showing is that here you've got 0 labor, so you've got obviously 0 output. But then you hire different people, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 right here, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and 13, 12, 13, 14, 15, right? So that's what this one is showing on the bottom. There's the number of people that you're hiring, and then here you have your output. So when we hire our 5th person, our output is right about, I don't know, about 25 or so, right? So as long as you set this up correctly, it's not really hard to create or to read. You just have to know what's on here. So this is your output here. This is your labor here, or your input. You can label it input or labor. And then these increments have to be the exact same, and they are this time. The output is by 10. Here the input is labor, so just every time you hire another person or so, it's all equal. So your increments are equal. Equal. Increments are equal. Increments are not actually inherently evil. Whoa. But increments are equal, and you've got your labels good, and you are ready to go. So after you get your labels, after you get your increments ready, then all you have to do is plot out your points. So when you hire, in this case, your first person right here, input is, pretty low, 1 or 2, right? And you hire your second person, input goes up a little bit. Third person, input is about 10. Fourth person, input is about maybe 15. And your 5th person, input is like 25. So all you got to do after you get your graph ready is just plot out your points, right? So all these points, put all these ones onto there correctly, and then just connect your dots. Again, we don't do trend lines right now. We're not doing any trend lines or best fits. You just connect the dots, okay? So after you get that one created, you have what it looks like that as you hire more labor, and this is where the law of variable proportions comes in, as you hire more and more labor, that your output is changing. All right? Now this graph creates, I guess let's call them sectors or segments or whatever you want to call these things, so that in your first, say, 6 people that you hire, when you hire your first 6 people, your returns or your output is increasing. Increasing means it goes up more than it did before. So when you hire your first person, it's only 1. When you hire a second person, you're up to like 4. So that's an increase of 3. When you hire your 4th person, you went from 4 to 10. So you went up 6 products, and that's 6 is more than the 3 you did before. So you're still increasing returns. In other words, you increased more than you increased last time. The second stage right here, your graph right here, calls it constant. Now, quick note, your book does not include constant when it goes over this graph on page 124. Your book has 3 stages. It includes a different one, but your book doesn't include constant. Constant just means as you hire more laborers, that the output increases the same it did before. So let's say 1 second here. Let's say this is your sixth laborer here, and let's say this was an increase to 35. So let's say that's an increase of 10, and then when you hired your seventh laborer here, it went up to 45, which is also an increase of 10. And then on your eighth person hired, it went up to 55. So 10 again. So these are all constant. In other words, it goes up 10 every time right here, and that's constant. It means it's the same increase as it was before. And then it gets to where you call what your graph right here. And so remember that in economics you have different terms for different books and different professors. This particular graph, you can find it online. It's a very common one used in colleges. This one calls it decreasing marginal productivity. Your book calls them returns. Your book says like increasing returns, constant returns or something like that. But this one calls it marginal productivity. It means as you hire a new person, how much extra product did you get? That's what marginal means. So in this case, your product, you'll notice it's still going up, right? It's still slanted up, but the marginal productivity or the returns or the output, kind of all those things the same, marginal productivity, output, returns, they're going up, but they're not going up as much as they were before, right? So before, when we were on the constant, we were doing 10. This right here was an increase of 10, but let's say this one right here, let's call this an increase of 9. It only went up 9. From input 10 to 211, it only went up 9 instead of 10. So let's say this one here went up 8. That's kind of sort of an 8. Okay, so input number 12, you only had an increase of 8. So these are still going up, but they're going up at a decreasing rate. Your book calls that diminishing, calls it diminishing returns. And that's fine. You can use decreasing or diminishing as long as you understand the idea here. Okay, now, one quick note that your book includes, but is not on this graph, and that's negative returns. At some point, let's say you hire your 16th person over here, and at 16, you now actually lose output. Output maybe goes down, takes a dive a little bit. Now, you might be thinking, if I hire more people, why would output go down? Well, sometimes you hire a bad person, but sometimes you also have too many workers. Let's say you've got one project, and the optimal division of labor is 15. When you hire that 16th person, now you just have somebody that is doing the job somebody else is doing. Now you just got people running into each other. Now you've got one job being done by two people. I don't know, it could be any number of things, but at some point, typically you can have too much labor. You can have too big of a change, too many inputs added in. So your output could actually take a dive, and then you hit that stage of negative returns. Now, we'll practice these things in class, but just get the idea right now. Output goes on the Y, input, in this case labor, goes on the X. Okay, you got the same kind of dividing up your increments equally. Don't worry about making your axes as equal because typically it's going to be longer than it is high. Don't worry about that. It just needs to look kind of proportional. Okay, plot out your points, create your line, and then you actually will create physical sectors. Each one of these saying something to the effect of increasing returns or marginal productivity, constant returns or more marginal productivity, decreasing or diminishing. I think diminishing is easier because we've already talked about diminishing in class. So diminishing returns or diminishing marginal productivity, and then your one over here would be negative returns or negative marginal productivity. All right, Section 3. Now, I don't mean to worry anybody, but Section 3 has more mistakes made on one specific item, or so, maybe on 3 specific items than anything else in the entire semester of economics. So, I'm warning you about that because you need to learn these formulas. These formulas that we're going to go over are fairly simple, but you need to know the formulas and be able to plug them in when you're asked to. Section 3 is titled Cost, Revenue, Profit Maximization. So let's go over cost and revenue first. From this point on, price and cost needs to be divided. All right, price is the amount that you pay for a product. Cost is what it takes to make it. So no longer am I going to accept a student saying that something cost $19.99 if that's the price. If that's the price, you will not get credit if you call it cost. Those are two different things, and you need to separate them, because cost is how much it takes to make a product, and your price is going to be set somewhere, hopefully, above that number. So price and cost, make sure we split those terms up. They are not the same. There are several different measurements of costs that we need to be familiar with. So the fixed cost is pretty easy. Fixed cost is also called overhead, just a term given to it. Fixed costs are the ones that do not change as you change production levels or as you change the amount of sales that you have. Fixed costs would be things like rent, like your salaries. To some of your workers make salary, which means they make the same amount every single month. And then you pay the same amount for rent or your mortgage. You pay, some of your bills are paid the same every single month, but then some of them are not. Some of them are paid according to production. In other words, if you increase your production, you may increase the amount of raw materials. You may increase the amount of hourly labor. The labor may increase, as you just saw on the previous chart. So any one of these variable costs, anything that changes with an increase or a decrease in output. If we have to lower our output, we're going to have less raw materials, and we're going to have less labor needed. You may fire people or lay them off, and you may have to cut hours or something like that. Okay? So variable costs, ones that do change according to production, and fixed costs do not. Add those two things together and you get your total costs. Now, earlier this year, we did some calculations to find profit and bottom line. This is the cost number. Okay, before you take out taxes, we took off costs. These are like business costs or production costs. How much does it cost you to produce your products or your services? Those are your business costs. Those are total costs. This is how much it costs you to run the business. Your fixed plus your variable equals your total. Now let me start going over one of the biggest things that is typically missed when working through section 3 here, and that's marginal cost. Let's talk through marginal cost a little bit because a lot of mistakes are made here, and I think it has to do with misunderstanding. I'm really messing up that term. Working with the stylus, I promise I'm working on it. All right, marginal cost. This is the idea, and the word marginal means one more, right? So this is the cost of producing one more item. Just like all the other marginals that we've had, this is the cost of making one more. And the reason why this is important is because as I hire new people, and let's say I hire Bob, and Bob increases my marginal product of the extra products I get from hiring one more person. Let's say I hire Bob, and Bob makes 10 extra products per day. But I have to pay Bob $100 per day. That means the marginal cost for hiring Bob is $10. In other words, it costs me $10 to make each one of those 10 products that Bob came up with, right? So the marginal product was 10, right? The variable cost or the labor cost of hiring Bob was 100, and the marginal cost per item was 10. So let's say then I hire Betty, and when I hire, I'm not sure where these names come from, but I hire Betty, and Betty gives me a marginal product of 15. But because Bob and Betty both come right out of college, I also pay Betty $100. So my variable cost for Betty is $100, but she comes up with 15 marginal products. Well, after calculating that out, the marginal product she gave me, and divide that into the variable cost it cost me to hire her, I find out that it actually costs $6.67 for each product that Betty made. So that is better. So I might go up to Bob and have a little talk with him about why I'm only getting 10 marginal products from him but 15 from Betty. But the idea here is that my marginal cost with Betty is lower. So if my price is $20, with Bob, I'm making $10 per product. With Betty, I'm making $13.33 per product. I'm making more money. So let me give you a formula for marginal cost, for how to find marginal cost, and then we'll go through an example of how to do it. All right, so marginal cost is going to equal the added variable cost divided by the marginal product, or simplified AVC divided by MP. Marginal cost equals added variable cost divided by the marginal product. So what it looks like on here, added variable cost, that's how much it cost me to, in this case, hire somebody. When I hired Bob, my added variable cost was $100. It cost me $100 to hire Bob, right? But the marginal product he gave me was 10. So this is how much did it cost me to hire Bob divided by the number of products that I got from Bob. It's the cost to hire somebody divided by the products you get from somebody. So what it looks like on there was the marginal product that Bob gave me was 10, and the added variable cost of hiring Bob was $100 a day. So this would, in particular, would be added variable cost 100 divided by the marginal product of 10, and your marginal cost would be 10. It costs $10. It cost $10 to make one product when I hired Bob. Every one of the products he came up with cost me $10 to make. All right. On the other side of that one, when I hired Betty, it cost me $100. That was the added variable cost, was $100, and she gave me a marginal product of 15. In this case, added variable cost divided by marginal product equals $6.60. I think I said 67 before, 66 cents, because we don't round up cents. Thank you for correcting me on that. Okay, so $6.66. Don't feel bad. I don't feel bad. It's okay. Number of man, I think we'll be fine. $6.66 for everyone that Betty created. So I'm making more money per product by hiring Betty than I was by hiring Bob. Now, businesses can make decisions based on this, but overall, you want to keep track of that one. And the one thing you want to make sure of is if hiring Bob gave me a $10 marginal cost, and then hiring Betty gave me a $6.66 marginal cost, I just have to make sure that both of those are lower than my price. Because if the price of my product is, let's say, $17, the price is $17, then I'm safe, because even though Bob made less than Betty, I'm still making $7 profit. Now, I haven't taken off fixed costs yet, but as far as marginal costs go, I still got $7 to play with right there. I'm probably still going to have a profit. So my overall profit will be better with Betty, but I'm still making money with Bob, so I'm okay. All right, we will go over more examples in class. Ask your questions in class. Real quick, let me go over the marginal cost curve. What it looks like is a very, very simple curve, but again, in economics, so many things that are simple make you look really, really, really smart. So follow me on marginal cost curve. When you make a marginal cost curve, here's your cost right here. Here is your quantity. Cost goes on the Y. Quantity goes on the X. So in this case, this is the marginal product. This is what you're making down here, right? These are the amount of products, or to make it more simple, let's go ahead and do labor. Okay, let's say this is the amount of people that we are hiring. Okay, so and when I hire my first person, let's say my marginal cost is about $4. So it cost me $4 to make one. But when I hire my second person, now I've got division of labor, right? So now my cost goes down to about $2.50. I hire my third person, division of labor. So now maybe my marginal cost goes down to $2. So now it's only costing me $2 to make a product, and I'm pumped up. Hire my fourth person, marginal cost goes down to about $1.50, and everything is good and everything is happy. However, I hire my fifth person, and my marginal cost goes back up to $2. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, why did it go up a little bit? Division of labor, right? Well, problems, maybe that person, maybe they don't work as hard, but more likely you divided the labor up already optimally. Maybe 4 people was the optimal level for your labor to be divided up. And when you went to 5 people, now maybe you've got 2 people doing one job. Maybe one section is faster than another section of production, and so you've got one section waiting on the others to catch up. It could be a number of things. But this marginal cost curve is illustrating the idea that as you divide labor up, your marginal cost will typically tend to go down, but at some point it is going to go up. You can only divide so much. So think of it like this. We just did a graph, the production function graph, and the production function graph, at some point, your production is going up, but then it reaches the top level and begins to hit that negative return side. So that's what you're showing here, is that marginal cost curve will tend to go down, but at some point, you're going to hit the point where maybe too much labor exists, and you're going to start to slope upward. Or to make it a little bit more visible, let's put it in these terms. The law of diminishing returns says that realistically, you're not always going to have increasing returns. There's going to be a time when your labor is too packed in, or you have enough workers and now division of labor is stopped benefiting you, and now it's slowing things down. Right. So before we had, let's say you had Bob, and Bob's marginal cost was 10, and then you had Betty, and Betty's marginal cost was $6.66, and then you hire, Ted, right? And Ted's marginal cost might have been, $5, right? But then you hire, Jan, right? So we hire Jan. Not sure why I can't think of names. And Jan works hard, but now labor has been divided up, and so your marginal product is slightly lower, and a lower marginal product will mean a higher marginal cost. So she works hard and does a good job, but you still have to pay Jan $100, and she produces slightly less, and so now your marginal product goes back up to $6.25. Okay, and then you hire Eric, and Eric's marginal cost goes up to $7.95, and so on. And so now we've hit that slope downward, but now since diminishing returns have taken effect, and you don't have higher and higher marginal products coming in, now your formula, your marginal cost formula, which is added variable cost divided by marginal product, well, if your marginal product is going down and your added variable cost is staying even, then your marginal cost is going to go higher and higher because you're dividing by a smaller number. Now, that's some middle school math. I'm sure as we practice it in class, it'll make more sense. Okay, we will go over practices on this one, but for right now, just make sure you understand marginal cost graphs. They look similar to this one. Most of them do. And then most of them are going to have this downward slope first, and then it's going to level out and it's going to start going up because of that law of diminishing returns. Now, along with this, the last regular graph that we'll have to do for marginal cost is going to include marginal revenue. Now, revenue is pretty simple. On page 130 of your book, it goes over total revenue, which is, we've already gone over that one, the total number of units you sell times the price you sell it at, multiplied by that. So that's your total revenue. Now, the marginal revenue, and this is going to be a simple idea, marginal revenue, let's make it real simple, and then you can read your book to get the bigger definition. But the marginal revenue is going to be equal to, typically, your price. Because think of what the definition of marginal revenue would be, is the extra revenue you bring in from the sale of one more product. Well, how much do you bring in from the sale of one more product? Well, you bring in your price. So if I sell tennis shoes for $25, every time I sell a pair of tennis shoes, my marginal revenue is $25, which is the price, because I bring in $25 of revenue every time. Okay? Now there is a little bit more technical side, but right now, for our purposes, marginal revenue is going to be equal to the price of the product. So if marginal revenue is equal to the price, let's use this graph right here to explain. In this case, your marginal revenue is set right here at $4. Okay, so this graph is going to be called, and you're going to love the name of this, it's just really, really smart sounding name. It's the profit maximizing quantity of output graph. PMQO, or just profit maximizing quantity of output. Also, I've seen it called the profit maximizing graph, profit maximization graph, whatever the case is. So profit maximization quantity of output, that's what this one is called. So in order to create this one, you need your marginal revenue. In this case, the price of the product is $4. So every time you sell one product, you get $4. That's your marginal revenue. All right. Now what this is going to say is, let's say your marginal costs start to come down, right? Things are good, your marginal cost is falling, and you're really happy. Because let's say on your second person hired, your marginal cost is $2.50, and your marginal revenue is $4, so you got $1.50 profit to work with there. $1.50 initial profit. Haven't taken off taxes yet, but for right now, the overall gross profit is going to be $1.50. So you're happy. You hire your third person, and your costs go down to $2. Even better. Hire a fourth person, costs are $1.50. You're thinking, yes, I'm making $2.50 for every one of those. But you hire your fifth person, and it goes back up to $2. So now you're thinking, wait a second, it's going back up. That's a bad thing, right? Well, not exactly a bad thing, because you're still below your cost, your price. I'm sorry, I just messed up my own. You're still below your price. So at 5, and your fifth person that you've hired, your fifth quantity of labor, your marginal cost is $2. Your marginal revenue is $4. So you're still making a spread of $2 per item. Well, that's good. It's not as good as before, but it's still good. In fact, on your sixth, when you hire your sixth person, it goes up to about $2.50, and you're thinking, uh-oh, it's getting too high. It is getting too high. You don't want it to be that high. You want it to be lower, but you're still making money. You're still making $1.50, because it's $1.50 below your marginal revenue. Now, when you hire your seventh person, then you notice that your marginal cost is now $4, and your marginal revenue is $4. So you probably don't want to get any worse than that. But what this graph is illustrating is that this entire section right here, everything right here, this is all profit. You're making money down here. So even when you hire your seventh person and it goes right to $4 marginal cost, it equals your marginal revenue. Even at that point, you're still okay. You don't want to be there. You want to be somewhere down below there. You want your marginal cost to be as low as possible. But even at 7, you're still okay. So what this graph is illustrating is that your business is never more profitable than at this point. Because even when even as you're going up to that point, you're still, even if you're only making 1 penny, even if your marginal cost was $3.99, you're still making a penny. Now, a penny doesn't sound very good, but you're still making a penny. So as long as you're at or below marginal revenue, you're going to be the most profitable. If you have any questions on that, do bring them into class, and we'll talk about those ones. But this graph illustrates the idea that your maximum profit, the most money that a business can bring in, is going to happen when when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. A business will not be any more profitable than it is at that stage. All right, last item, regular graph item that we have for you. On the break even, Your book gives you a definition, but does not give you the graph, just like with the marginal cost. We've added those ones in because graphing is a talent I want you to make sure you graduate with. And the marginal cost graph, the break-even graph, the one that we're looking at here, you want to take a look at a couple of items that you should already be recognizing. For instance, this is your revenue right here. We've already talked about your cost. This would be your total cost, because here's your variable and here's your fixed. So these two things added together equal your total cost. So this could be called TC right here, or total costs. So what this is measuring is break even is when you hit the amount of revenue to where you can pay off all of your costs. Let me explain. Let's say during 1 month, your total cost for your business to run your business is $17,000. That's your total cost. Your variable plus your fixed. Your total cost for 1 month, let's say, is $17,000. You need to make, you need to get $17,000 total in order to cover all of your costs, right? So with $17,000 of costs, and let's say the price of your product is $10. You're selling your product for $10. Then what the break-even point is showing you is that in order to cover your costs, you have to make, divide these two, 17,000 divided by 10. You have to make 1,700 products and sell them in order to pay off your costs. So that number, your break even, this is a number of sales you have to make, a number of products you have to create and sell in order to pay off your costs. So that goes down here on your output. You have to make 1,700 products and sell them in order to make enough money to pay off those costs. So after you make and sell 1,700 products, everything else is profit. So in this case, it has all of your loss over here. If you don't make 1,700, if you make less than 1,700, you're actually losing money, right? But if you make more than 1,700, make and sell more than 1,700, then you're making profit, right? All of this over here represents profit right up into here. This is all profit. You're making money in this case, okay? Now I just made a mess of all of that. Well, again, we'll practice these in class, but your break even is going to be a number of products that you need to sell and to make and to sell in order to pay off your costs. And you find that, and here's your formula that you can use. You find your total costs and divide that by your price. So if your total cost is $17,000 and the price of your product is $10 each, 17,000 divided by 10 is 1,700. Your break even right here would be 1,700. We need 1,700 products to be created and sold in order to break even. And then every one we make after that is profit. So profit would be everything over here. This is all profit. Everything over here. If we make 1,800, we're making profit. If we make 1,900, we make and sell 1,900, we're making profit because we're on the right side. Everything below there would be loss, right? If we only make 1,600, then our revenue is down here, but our costs are still up here, right? So we're going to lose money in that case. Anyway, put these on the podcast. Take a look at them. Come into class. We'll go over these in class. We will review over these things. Email me questions, and make sure you have questions for class time too.